Hello and welcome back to another episode of This Week in Christian History. And the week of October 13th of our episode, we are originally focusing, which makes this an interesting twist on our podcast. We were originally focused in on the death of a Coptic Ethiopian Christian king named Iyasu I, who died on October 13th in 1706. But as my learned guest has helped me figure out today, and because of my mistake of trying to be able to connect the dots, we're actually going to be able to talk about a different Ethiopian king whose name was Lij Iyasu, who is we'll get into a good bit, and so we get to talk about some of all of that. So Dr. Wolbert Smidt is with us here today. He is at the University of Jena in Germany and is an Ethiopian a scholar and an enthusiast, an anthropologist, and a myriad of other things that is joining us to be able to talk about Christianity in Ethiopia, which I think is an absolutely fascinating subject. So, Dr. Smith, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I think our starting point is the name,
Yes.
Iyasu. I think this is quite an interesting entrance point to the entire history. Uh, what's now interesting about Ethiopian monarchs is not only that they are Christian by tradition since centuries and centuries, not only because Ethiopia has officially been Christian since the 4th century AD, which means one of the earliest Christian countries of the world. But in addition to that, the Ethiopian Christianity is not something just found, let's say, in Christian rituals, in Christian discourses, but it organizes the entire political structure. It organizes the entire, let's say, organization of public life. And this includes the naming systems used by monarchs and by the wider population. So Iyasu is a good example. It means Joshua. It refers to Joshua. And let me explain a little bit about the background, about the
Yes,
context
please.
of it. I think that's quite important to understand. Christian country is not the same as another Christian country. Christian country can mean everything. Ethiopia was over the centuries since late antiquity. It's very well documented. Warfaring country, a warfaring state, a monarchy with a very strong army and very strong military traditions. What is
Mhm.
now interesting, however, that exactly these military traditions, these traditions of rulership, are strongly linked with biblical discourses.
Mhm.
So every single political action, every single question of political organization, every single question of legitimacy of monarchs is linked with biblical discourses and or Christian discourses. So what's interesting here is when you are a king, you want to have a sort of biblical background, not because just what you are saying or what you're doing, not just because of an abstract reference system, but you yourself have to be part of the biblical narrative.
Ah,
So Ethiopia is fascinating from a point of view of history of Christianity because there are very few countries which are as radical in their, let's say, self-Christianization and the identification of anything happening in the country with biblical stories.
okay.
Since quite ancient times, it's in late antiquity thing, which we can observe in the sources. And Ethiopia is a country which is rich from a historical point of view. There are chronicles, there are hagiographies, the writings about the saints, including Ethiopian saints. There's a very rich literature, Christian literature, translated from Arabic, translated from Greek, and from even other languages. So this is a country which is whose power system, whose spiritual system, whose cultures in plural form is heavily ingrained in Christian narratives. So that's how we can easily understand that any monarch has to be part of this kind of thinking system.
Wow. It's kind of ingrained almost. It's
It's
understood that this is really what
yes,
this is our way of not only governing, but also that is so totally tied to a biblical narrative as well. And then not just biblical in an Old Testament biblical way to think of the Queen of Sheba, for example, on kind of where that might be, but also then a New Testament way, like we learn about the Ethiopian eunuch, right? And the other stories that are there. There's a transfer into that, and they're intermelded, almost kind of like the Byzantine Empire of some sorts, right? I mean, where the king was the emperor, but he also was maybe not taking care of the day-to-day parts of the clergy, but they were so interwelled to each other that you couldn't tell where one stopped and the other one started. I mean, is that sort
yeah,
of right, or
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Let me use some of the examples, some of the
yes,
points
please.
you mentioned. You mentioned the Queen of Sheba. So I just said that Ethiopian rulership was not just referring to biblical stories, but they themselves had to ingrain their bodies, their lineages, their entire power system, their entire system of relationships into the biblical story. And one entrance point for Ethiopian rulership was precisely the biblical story of the Queen of Sheba, which
Mhm.
is in Ethiopian language Nigist Saba. Saba refers to the really historical kingdom of Saba, which is a South Arabian kingdom on which we are working together with colleagues from the German Archaeological Institute and others. So this is a real kingdom. And what's interesting in antiquity, we had an important kingdom, which was an Ethiopian Sabaean kingdom in the northern highlands of Ethiopia. We have Sabaean architecture. We have kings who call themselves the kings of the local people and of the Sabaeans,
Ah,
which is the Sabaeans in Ethiopia. So we have a real historical tradition of a presence of this ancient population, this ancient people, which is mentioned in the Bible. And what's important about the biblical tradition is that the so-called Queen of Saba, or Queen of Sheba in English, is visiting King Solomon because of his wisdom. She wants to learn about his wisdom. She wants to learn about him. This is what the biblical story tells. The Ethiopians are always very good storytellers, and they add details which are so well constructed that they became an absolutely central part of Ethiopian identity. And what is this story? In fact, King Solomon of Israel tricked the Queen of Saba. He gave her uh, a lot of food with a lot of salt. She got very thirsty. And before they had concluded a sort of contract, in fact, it's a classical treaty of peace. It's a peace treaty. I will not take anything belonging to you, and you will not take anything from me. That's a peace treaty.
sure.
But how did he apply it? In fact, he gave her only food and nothing to drink, and it was absolutely salty. So in the night, she woke up and could not bear the thirst. So she went to the palace area where there were the wells used by Solomon. So she was drinking. Solomon said, "Oh, I caught you. You are taking something which belongs to me. I will now take something which belongs to you." And he slept with her.
Uh, that's a much better story than we get in Kings and
So
Chronicles.
that's a very Ethiopian story. So what happened? She went back, and according to the Ethiopian narrative, she went back to Ethiopia. And there's something interesting in the historical record. In fact, in southern Arabia, we do not have queens. We have only kings. But we do have, we know it from inscriptions, very powerful women who were ruling the country, it seems, in a symbolic or very concrete way, together with kings. So we do have female figures in the rulership of the country in the antiquity, in the time of the kingdom of Saba, in the time of the Sabaeans of Ethiopia. So according to the Ethiopian narrative, this queen went back to Ethiopia, she gave birth to a king, and this king became the founder of the dynasty. And if we look further into this genealogy, it also means that Jesus himself is a relative.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's very clear Jesus comes from the house of David. And precisely this is also the case for the Ethiopian kings. So this is why when Ethiopian rulers name themselves after biblical figures, it's not like in the European system where we simply take, let's say, beautiful names or names which evoke some interesting or important ideas. So it's a sort of abstract reference system, which is nice to have, but which is not 100% part of our bodies, of our
Hmm.
lineage, of
Hmm.
our daily life. In the Ethiopian definition, it's totally different. There's these 2 points. One, the descent, direct descent from King Solomon means that these kings were relatives of Jesus Christus, Jesus, which gave them a proximity to heavens, to God, to the will of God, which no other king in the world can have.
Almost like a divine right, right? I
It's
mean,
a divine right.
I got
And
in it. I got it. I
it's
was
a
born one
genealogical,
day. I was born one day of my mother, and because the lineage to the lineage to the lineage happens, I've got the credibility, if you will. If anybody challenges or wonders or other the, I've
exactly.
got it in me, just like my great 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 did all the way down.
Absolutely. So there's an aspect of inherited divinity, a closeness to divinity, without any claim to be close to the divine in the sense of replacing the divine. This doesn't exist in Christianity, this doesn't exist in Ethiopian tradition. But this proximity still is a
Mm.
very, very crucial factor in the entire power system of Ethiopia. So this genealogical element is the one. The other element is the naming. And here we come back to Iyasu, our starting point and our
Yes,
general topic.
yes.
Uh, when you name your child after a biblical figure or after a Christian idea, this again is not just a name which refers to an idea. It creates, and this is part, very strong element of Orthodox Christian traditions. This means evoking presence. Presence of the divine is evoked through the name. Let me
Mm.
take a more modern example. Many people do know about Haile Selassie, the last emperor of Ethiopia in the 20th century. Haile Selassie means the power of the Trinity. So Heil means power. Haile,
Okay.
the E is linking it. So like in English, off. Selassie means Trinity. So the king, the ruler, the king of kings is named after Trinity, not in the sense that he refers himself to Trinity, but he refers himself to the power of the Trinity. So the Trinity is working through him. And in the Orthodox tradition, there's something extremely important with names and with iconography, with paintings.
Hmm.
If you have a painting showing a saint, the saint is present through the painting. This is the precise meaning of icons.
Right.
Uh, Paintings are paintings. They're again nice to have. They evoke something. They let us think about, for example, the saints. But in the Orthodox Christian tradition, it's totally different. The painting itself has an effect in the sense that it creates an absolute presence of the divine or of the saint, of the saintly figure which who is shown. So a picture a painting of Selassie of the Trinity means the Trinity is actually with you. The same with names. So if you call your child Iyasu, you refer to Joshua, the biblical figure. And what's the meaning of referring to Joshua? Means referring to the closeness between Joshua and God.
Mm.
So you link again through the name, you link yourself with the divine. You have one, the divine heritage through your genealogy, and second, you have the divine proximity actively ingrained in your name.
Wow. Wow. How fascinating. We are really enjoying our conversation here with Dr. Smidt, all about Ethiopian Christianity. So let's talk a little bit about Lij Iyasu, who was one of the reasons we got together to have conversation, even though I'm glad to know that I messed up which one I thought we were going to talk about today, because that helps us to learn so much more about him and about this piece of Christianity. So one question though, so if and we'll just keep calling her the Queen of Sheba for our ears, okay, so that we can connect that a lot better. If she is through this tradition carrying one of Solomon's many children, right? That he had, uh, and so she's connected to this Jewish king. Where does the Christianity piece come into that? How do the Ethiopians begin to believe, through their tradition, at least anyway, that no, this guy from Nazareth really was the Christ. It was the Messiah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Very interesting question. So we have to look into the Ethiopian narrative and not only into the objective history. The objective history, in short, very simple. In a few words, in the 4th century, the Aksumite kingdom, which is a territory found in today's northern Ethiopia and partially in the today's Eritrean highlands, this Aksumite kingdom was an important power linking the Indian Ocean, Red Sea with the Eastern Mediterranean. So the Aksumite kingdom was linked through trade and exchange of ideas through the ancient trade routes of the seas. We should imagine that in ancient times the seas were connectors. The seas and the coasts were connecting far away high cultures with each other. So Rome was in fact in contact with India and with China through the Red Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Who was at the Red Sea? It was the Aksumite kingdom. So for the Byzantines, for the Eastern Roman Empire, they were natural partners and vice versa. So you had knowledge exchange, you had an exchange, it seems, also of craftsmanship and so on. And in the 4th century, the Aksumite kingdom, some people call it Aksumite Empire due to this far outreach, um, managed to ingrain themselves into the alliance structures of the Eastern Roman Empire. Eastern Rome was just on the way to become Christian from the top to the reaching the society.
Mm-hmm.
Many merchants were Christian. So a couple of merchants found themselves in the Aksumite kingdom and were in charge of educating the king, the future king. Why did it happen? Because the Aksumite rulership was not a kingdom closed away from the world, living from their riches, but traditionally they had a very strong outreach into the entire world. They exported incense, gold, ivory, even slaves, and so on. The demand was going into all directions. So within this network, there was also an exchange of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So Christianity arrived there very early. So Aksum became Christian. Um, it's slightly debated when exactly, but according to Ethiopian tradition, it was around 333. And different from other countries, they did not remove their religious and historical traditions and historical memories from their stories of legitimization, but they integrated them.
Okay.
They had already the link with Saba. They had oral traditions of migration, ancient migration movements towards Israel. All this was fitting very well into the biblical narrative. So immediately when they became Christian, they put their own stories together with the biblical stories, which gave a legitimacy to
Hmm.
everything found in the history back to the Solomonic times. So this is one factor. Uh,
Maybe we would say the connection was easy,
the
right? I mean,
connection
it
was
was
easy.
not
In
hard to
short,
figure.
the
It wasn't like
connection
they
was
were
easy.
Hindu, right? Or that they were
Yeah,
being, or they were going some totally different place. You can connect
yes,
these dots and understand that, and that
perfect.
makes some sense, right?
Yes, and we should also think of the fact that they are Semites, Semitic speaking people. So today they speak Amarinya, Tigrinya. This is languages and other Semitic languages in the highlands. We are speaking of the Ethiopian highlands. So in these areas, uh, Semitic languages dominate. So the closeness to other Semitic narratives is evident. So there is this very high level of possibility of recognition of biblical stories. They're very similar to the stories known locally. So this is one point. And if we look into Ethiopian narratives, it's quite interesting. They take it very seriously that the Old Testament is a preparation of Christ.
Mm.
In some more modern, rather European, Western Protestant traditions, the New Testament is the new teaching which somehow obliterates the older teaching. In the Ethiopian tradition, it's not the case. The New Testament is the word of God according to Ethiopian tradition, together with the New Testament. So any narrative of the Old Testament
Ah,
has to be taken as creating the ground for Christ. And as they have been, according to their narrative, the earliest descendants of Solomon himself and Solomon's followers, who migrated together with the Queen of Saba and later her son to Ethiopia, because of this identification with ancient Israel, um, it was clear that they were part of exactly this preparation of Christ. So, according to the Ethiopian perspective, no one is closer to the Bible than the Ethiopians themselves, besides the Israelis. And we find even that that the Ethiopians call themselves, in some literature tradition, the Israelawian. So I suggest we
interesting.
jump now into the early 20th
Yes,
century and
yes.
look
Listen,
at Lij Iyasu himself.
you'll have to go to
Talking,
dinner soon, right? I'm wearing
yes,
you out.
yes,
Okay.
yes. So talking about the context is interesting, but what does it mean in daily life of rulers? So when Lij Iyasu was born, this was in the second half of the 19th century. He was the grandson of the great Emperor Menelik II, who is known as the unifier of Ethiopia, of modern Ethiopia. He was a great warlord. He identified himself strongly with Saint George, the fighter against a fighting saint, the killer of the dragon.
Right.
Um, so Menelik styled himself as a follower of Saint George, and based on this idea, he occupied a number of neighboring territories, countries, and so on. But identifying this occupation with the restoration of Christianity. So this is the heritage of Lij Iyasu when he was born. And in 1909, so Menelik was at the end of his reign. His health was frail. He understood he has to name a successor. He chose Lij Iyasu. So why was first? Why was Iyasu named after the earlier Iyasu. One was the biblical story, I mentioned it, but this other one is quite important because with this reference, with this name, they created a reference to Iyasu the First. And Iyasu the First was an important figure in the period before the downfall of Ethiopia as a unified state. In the 18th century, Iyasu I was a king in the 18th century. This was a period which was marked by presence of other Orthodox Christian populations, bringing information, bringing goods from the Indian Ocean, from the Red Sea, even from the Eastern Mediterranean, Armenians, and so on. It was a flourishing period, also flourishing from the point of view of theology and art, and economically too.
Mm.
Later in the late 18th century and 19th century, Ethiopia broke into pieces.
Okay.
There were independent kingdoms, peasant republics, rebellious territories, permanent internal conflict. That's at least how the Ethiopian tradition describes it. So when Iyasu, the grandson of Menelik, was born, the idea was, let's refer ourselves to this last period of a flourishing Ethiopia, which is about to be restored. So you see a
As a
good
reminder
political program.
of who we have been,
Yeah,
connecting to that name, that also how important that name is also in the connection. It's not like they named him Edward or something, right? I mean,
that's exactly the
right?
point.
There was a reason for this, and so for that part of there's the extra connection, right, to
Absolutely.
Menelik to do that. Okay.
And Iyasu the First was also someone who gave richnesses to churches. We have interesting manuscripts produced in that time, Christian manuscripts. So this is part of the reference system. So Menelik has created a modern Ethiopia, unified by force, building up huge armies, totally creating a new system, economic system, inviting foreign advisors. So it was a period of very rapid modernization. In the same time, colonization was going on. Colonization meant African countries were in danger. So the British Empire, the French, even the Italians, even the Germans from another side, everyone was sort of flooding into the Horn of Africa, flooding into
Mhm.
Eastern Africa and the wider Northeastern Africa. So Menelik needed also to establish a Christian narrative, an anti-colonial Christian narrative. So the restoration of the flourishing Christian kingdom was the core of this politics, including the politics of the naming. So you see that point.
Yes.
Now, Iyasu, in fact, was named successor of Menelik by Menelik himself in 1909. And what happened soon after that? Menelik had a stroke. He almost lost any capacity to speak.
Okay.
The first phase, his wife, Aitu, which means his sunshine, God's sunshine, again,
Okay.
another reference to
Okay.
another philosophical idea, um, took power. She started using the seal of the emperor for government decisions. So it was a sort of de facto regency. Lij Iyasu was very young. He was a teenager in that time, but Menelik had also named a tutor for Lij Iyasu. So in 1910, this tutor, together with Lij Iyasu and the family circles, decided to remove the wife of the emperor from power, put her into a monastery. You see, this is also what had been done in Europe, in European history. We know
Sure.
that someone who was disturbing was always ending up in a monastery.
Right.
So that is what happened to her at the end. She had to care for her husband, who could not speak, who was alive. So power went into the hands of Lij Iyasu and his tutor. The tutor died quite soon. So starting from 1911, the very young Iyasu took power and controlled the government.
Mm.
Now there is one very notable difference between the earlier Ethiopian kings, and the period of Menelik and Lij Iyasu. Very crucial. Before I had described Ethiopia as a very Christian country with where the monarchy is deeply ingrained into Christian and biblical narratives.
Hmm.
However, because Menelik had enlarged Ethiopia um, 2 times, so historical Ethiopia from before Menelik was about 30% of the Ethiopia which Menelik left to his successor.
Wow. Okay.
This included a lot of populations of the most diverse religions. In traditional historical Ethiopia, there was a group of Jews. They were integrated into the Ethiopian narratives. They had their own place, but and a very small group of Muslims. But through this extreme expansion of the empire, you had suddenly 20 to 30% Muslims and a very huge number of non-Christians, non-Muslims following a number of inner African traditional religions.
Okay.
So how do you integrate all this?
These that are living in this Christian nation,
In this
right?
Christian empire,
Empire that is all of this, and this geographic place that's been 3 times larger than what it was. You bring all
three
these
times
other
larger
people
than it
in, but
was.
yet we're Christian. But now I've got 25% of my other people and even other percentages that are of all these. How
Yes.
do you do that? How do you govern? What do you do with that, right?
And now it's quite interesting. Lij Iyasu is an interesting example for a very local form of Christianity, which now starts playing a role. And here it becomes interesting because we see, with taking Ethiopia as an example, that Christianity should not be just understood as a religion, as a reference system, an intellectual or spiritual reference system, but as a practice of organizing a society. Um, this is what I had described before. And now, Lij Iyasu, if we look at his family, his father, in fact, originally had been a Muslim, but a Muslim who was a prince and had managed to get high-level recognition by Menelik and by the previous emperor. And this recognition led to the conversion of this Muslim prince. So he was a prince ruling over a specific province. Some part of the province was Muslim, some part of the province was Christian. So why was it Muslim and Christian? This is part of traditional Ethiopia because it was a border region and it was in the center of an ancient trade route, linking the Red Sea, linking the
Mhm.
Indian Ocean with inner Ethiopia. So Muslim presence was extremely important for historical
Mhm.
Ethiopia
Mhm.
because Muslims were the ones who were bringing goods, they were the international merchants, they were bringing knowledge. So any
Sure.
kind of modern knowledge was brought, among others, by these Muslim traders. So for the Christian rulers in this specific territory, it was highly important to entertain relationship with the Muslims. How it was done? Through marriage. So the leading Christian families married Muslim ladies, the leading Muslim families married Christian ladies, and their children usually became Muslim and Christian, changing their religion according to situation. Not in an opportunistic way. I want to make this very clear. This is not about opportunism. It's
Mm.
about a religion-based system of governance, where you were forced to integrate groups which were not part of the dominant religion, but um, on the other hand, you were not ready to give up the dominant religion of Ethiopia. So how did you do it? By intermarriage on the local level and on the higher level being Christian. This is a system of integration of non-Christian religions into the entire Christian system, which is
Wow.
which assured exchange of knowledge, of goods, and so on. So Lij Iyasu came from that. And now to make it short and simple, Lij Iyasu had suddenly this country with a lot of different regions, ethnic groups, languages, religions. how do you create a sort of integrative system which will not have the effect that everyone will go into rebellion? You integrate them into exactly that system using the system which he had inherited from this Christian province where his father came from. So he decided to marry the daughters of every single important Christian prince in his country and every single important Muslim leader in his country.
Wow. Okay. Like his great Solomon, right? Who thought, let's marry everybody.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Here you have the ancient reference. So the idea of monogamy is rather secondary in the Ethiopian tradition. Um, while it is still important, but organizing family life, organizing connections, organizing peace in the society is the real demand of society. It's a Christian demand. So, from a Christian point of view, you're supposed to create peace. How do you create peace? By family relations. So that's what he did himself. So he married himself to all princes to their daughters of his realm. But this is precisely what had been used against him in a power struggle. It also meant that some of the elites who had profited enormously from this Ethiopian expansion of the late 19th century, it also meant exploitation. It meant uh, more
Sure.
access to goods, to richnesses of all kinds. So it created competition. And Lij Iyasu was about to do something totally right, giving a place to every region within the governance system in a surprising way, but that's what he did because
Yeah.
marriage always meant not just a personal relationship, but it meant that other members of the networks around these people got positions, got a word to say within the government. So it
They
was an
got
integrated
connected.
system.
They got
Yeah,
connected in a different level instead of just being a subject to the king.
exactly.
They have a biological DNA connection to the king, and so
Basically, that's it.
everybody's getting a little bit of something to kind of bring into
Yes,
the ideas was his way of being able to govern.
absolutely. And this, at the end, led to a catastrophe because these elites now use Christianity against this Christian ruler, saying, as he has married Muslim daughters, daughters of Muslim princes, he is a Muslim. So, in the name of Christianity, we have to depose him. So, there was a huge coup d'etat. This was in 1916. In the name of Christianity, they replaced the Christian ruler of Ethiopia, and in fact, by another daughter, a daughter of Emperor Menelik, and a new regent, which was Rastafari, which is the later Haile Selassie, whom I had mentioned before, who
Sure.
again created a reference system to the Christian traditions of Ethiopia. But in fact, what's interesting with Haile Selassie, no one is more Christian than him, according to narrative, but no one built as many mosques in Ethiopia than him. And that was a Christian idea. The Christian idea of integration of all populations
Interesting.
within the ruler system um, had the effect that Muslims had to find their place.
Absolutely fascinating. I can see why someone like yourself as a scholar could say, "Hey, I could dip down into this world and I could be here for the rest of my rest of my career, just connecting the dots and being able to see how it all integrates into each other and how much of that is a part of all that. What a rich history that is, and I'm so
Mm.
glad that we took the opportunity to learn so much more about Ethiopian Christianity, how that fits into their governance, how that fits into their tradition, and things that they don't just refer to, but Christians and Jews and others could certainly be able to go back and say, from our literature, we see how this fits into the whole picture about all of that. It's absolutely
Mhm.
a fantastic conversation and thought, and I just can't thank you enough for taking some time to be with us, Dr. Smidt, to know more about all this great subject that we've learned. I can tell you, I've learned so much. I'm not sure how I can digest it all at once. I'm going to have to go back and rewatch, right, to be able to pull it all together. So
Yeah,
thank you again. If people want to follow more about the work that Dr. Smith is doing as well in Ethiopia, and we'll put those links into the notes here so that people can go and click on that and learn more and be able to follow the good work that you are doing and have been done. So thank you again for your time.
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.